That's great. All right, kids. Today, actually, you missed the podcast. We did that earlier in my office for like a couple hours. We were talking about, yeah. But let's take a little bit of a different track today. First of all, this is Dr. Laughlin. He's in the music department here on campus. If you don't know him, you should. He's a cool dude. And he's here today because we're going to have a conversation about the music of Harry Potter, and we'll probably stem into a larger discussion, hopefully, about philosophies of music. Because I'm sure there's not just one, but we won't hit on all of them, but at least sort of trying to get at what is it about the music in movies, maybe Harry Potter in particular, but also movies, cinema writ large. How does that connect us to story and character? And is there something in the process of creating the music? Is there a philosophy behind the process that helps that be a stronger connection? But in thinking about the sort of emotional connections that we have with music, and and sometimes maybe it's a disconnect, right? I mean, the music is not what we expect, for a story or a character, and I think the place that we probably wanted to start today was talking about kind of John Williams, right? Because he's the probably one of the most popularized, known, right, film composers in the 20th century in American cinema, no question. He's credited with quite a few iconic scores, right, from Jaws to all the way up to Star Wars to Harry Potter to all kinds of stuff. So we'll probably start out talking a little bit about him. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Laughlin to kind of give us a little bit of backstory on Mr. Williams and hopefully some insight into how that plays out later on into some discussions we might have with music and philosophy and whatnot. So
thank you.
Take it away, man.
All right. So obviously, if you've been to a movie within the last 30, 42 years, 50 years, you've probably have been heard the music of John Williams at some point. And sometimes maybe not even realize it was John Williams. Schindler's List would be a good example. You may not even think about it being part of John Williams. But I wanted to kind of start, just get a little bit of background of John Williams. And this, hopefully you'll kind of see how it shapes, or at least in my view, shapes the way that he composes and the way that he uses his music in the movies. So John Williams was born in New York, 1932, and grew up studying piano and music in general. And when he was about 1948, his family moved to California. And it was during this time that he started studying with a gentleman by the name of Mario Castelnuovo Tedesco. And most folks have no idea who Tedesco is. And sometimes if you Googling John Williams and you're trying to find some biography or something about him, there'll be like one little sentence that he studied with Tedesco, and that's pretty much it. So when he was there, and this is before he spent some time in the military, he spent about 3 years in the military. But while he was in California, he studied with Tedesco. And not only did he study with Tedesco, but a lot of other really well-known movie composers and film composers and scores studied with him as well. For example, Henry Mancini, Andre Previn, Jerry Goldsmith, a lot of these guys that became really well-known in the composition, movie composing era, studied with Tedesco. So there was something there. And Tedesco was, he immigrated to the U.S. He was an Italian composer, had some success with some of his art music, or classical music slang, but art music is really what it is. And Toscanini was conductor of the New York Phil at the time, and had Tedesco perform several of his piano concerti with them. And then Tedesco kind of got involved with films and moved his family to California and started composing films. And he's actually credited, he worked for MGM for a very long time, for over 200 films he was a part of. And just to give you some idea, I think Williams is credited with about 80. So with Tedesco, once in a while, we've never heard of Tedesco because he was considered, has all these films, but he was considered a ghostwriter. And what that basically means, just like in literature, basically means is you have one composer that's hired to get credit. You have these ghostwriters or composers that are writing these music for these individual scenes or sections or whatever that the director needs, and then it's kind of compiled and put together for the finished product, and then the lead composer gets credit for that score. And his name will never be mentioned in the credits. He's just paid for a service. So you had all these guys studying with Tedesco, and then kind of from this, we'll get to see hopefully later on how this becomes influenced with his music and his way of writing. So he studies with him, and Tedesco was really a symphonic type of composer, very melodious. Most folks that do know him for his guitar works. Actually, he wrote quite a lot of good guitar music. Classical guitarists usually know, oh, Tedesco. I've played one of his works. I know some of it, but very few know about his scoring. So he really liked those long kind of soaring melodies, very thematic, which is very important, very symphonic sound. And what we mean by symphonic is it's not just, 2 or 3 people playing. It's not like a quartet or quintet. We're talking, he liked those big orchestras that you typically see at the early beginning of the 20th century, because as we're coming in through the Romantic period, the orchestras get larger. Actually, you see that all the way through from Baroque, classical, Romantic. It just getting bigger, 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 bigger. We get the 20th century, it's huge. And then what happens? World War. Everyone's off the war, and then they get itty bitty really quick because we don't have the players. Everyone's off the war. Okay, but with Tedesco, he was still in that frame of mind of these large orchestras, big sounds. So this kind of starts to be embedded with his pupils. We can say with Henry Mancini scores, Jerry Goldsmith, all these big guys that became really popular later on. So after Williams studied with him, like I said, he spent about 3 years in the Army. When he got back out, he moved back to New York, where he started studying piano with a lady by the name of Rosina Lavigne, and she was a piano teacher at Juilliard. And her husband, Joseph Lavigne, was really, really well known. Rosina became well known because she had some very famous pupils, John Browning, Van Cliburn being one of those, where after Van Cliburn had studied with her for a year or two, something like that, went to Russia, won the Tchaikovsky piano competition, and just took off after that. Now, most folks do not credit, and even some of the teachers at Juilliard. My teacher I had in Memphis was a student of Adele Marcus, who was a student of Joseph Levine at Juilliard. And so she would always tell stories about that. Most folks thought that Rosina was just a hack and just happened to get really good students. And that's true with Van Cliburn because he studied with his mother until he went to Juilliard. So his mother's really the one that prepared him to go to win the Tchaikovsky. But anyway, Rosina gets credit. So Williams studied with her, and not only was he into art music, but he was also into jazz. And he played jazz quite a bit and had some jazz trios and stuff throughout New York. And then he decided, hey, I want to go back to Hollywood. I want to try this film scoring thing. And he did a couple of small films and started kind of building a little bit of a name for himself. But it wasn't until the 70s where he really just kind of exploded. And so what do you think the first movie in the 70s was that really where he developed a name for himself? Any guesses? You guys know any movies from the 70s? Okay, Star Wars. A little bit before Star Wars. That's good. Star Wars was 77. What do you think came before that? Some of you are looking like they had movies before 77.
When was Jaws made?
Donna.
Yeah, it's 75.
Donna.
Yeah. Jaws was kind of his first big hit. And I always make the joke that's the most famous half step in the history of mankind. So just, word of caution, if you're ever out swimming in the ocean and you hear a full orchestra play a half step, don't look around, just go to the beach. Don't say, well, that's odd. Where did that come from? No, just start screaming and swim as fast as you can to get to shore. But that's a good example because there's really no melody. in that whole thing. It's just kind of a theme. And it's, honestly, it's a half step. Da-da, that's it, right? There's not anything very exciting necessarily about it. But when that full orchestra plays it slowly and gradually speed up, something's about to happen, right? And if you're on land, you're okay. You don't, whatever, right? Unless it's a land shark, but that's a completely different lecture. Yeah,
Sharknado.
It could be Sharknado.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I mean, there would be so many half steps all over the place. It would just be that would be a true 20th century score right there. Schoenberg would be proud, I guess. Yeah. So you have that, right? And it's really just more themes, which is interesting because that one little half step theme kind of helps set in motion for the next big hit, which is Star Wars, right? So once we get to Star Wars, now what happens now? A couple things. First, we have a gentleman by the name of Ray Dolby starts to create stereo sound, right? So this becomes a huge thing. And as a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, there was a time to where if you wanted to show Star Wars, it was such a big hit that you needed to have the stereo sound in the theater. They wouldn't let you show it the other way. You had to have this. Now, some of you may remember, I don't know, I hope you guys remember this. If not, I really feel old, where they started switching to digital film making as opposed to, and then there was a big kind of push to get theaters into it. No?
Yeah, no, probably not.
No.
They were probably, you guys probably don't remember that, I would imagine.
In your history books.
Yeah, it's happened though. Yeah, I mean, we're basic film project. Well, you're talking like mid to late 90s. Yeah, so you're like sort of right. Yeah. Where traditional film projectors started to be replaced by digital projection. So yeah. Ironically, all of these products were marketed by Lucasfilm. I mean, his company owns them all. But
Yes.
Yeah.
Our switch is more video cassette to DVD.
Okay.
That's more like our generation.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Because we had those as kids, and then DVDs came in when we were in like elementary, middle school. So that's kind of the digital move that we.
And
Gotcha.
VCRs, we had like hundreds of VCRs.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
some of you probably had the VCR DVD combo, right? I mean, you had like but yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we're good there.
And let's not mention Laserdisc.
Yeah. Or beta.
Right. Oh, but
Yeah. That's
All right.
8-track.
Yeah, oh yeah. So when that comes, that was a huge deal because now when we get into Star Wars, it's not so much about, and obviously when you're looking at, there's going to be scenes that are going to have the director wants certain sounds or trying to set a mood and that sort of thing. So there'll be tidbits that'll be there. But if you notice with Star Wars, the music for the most part keeps going. It just kind of changes as you transition. So it's a transitional type of thing. You don't have a lot of dead time or whatever. Because you have to remember early on before that before you had music and the film together, they would just send a list of pieces for the pianist to play during silent film. And they would just play, and then they would add specific pieces, that sort of thing. So it was, this was a huge kind of push. And this is where, and it kind of started with Jaws, where we started having the symphonic sound. And basically what that means is where you have basically a full orchestra, 80-piece orchestra that's playing it. And this becomes quite a bit different because one of the big movements is like, obviously around the 70s and even before then, art music was going through a change. And once we get to 20th century, this is really where the split between art music and popular music happens. And so, composers were always experimenting with things. They were doing stuff like with prepared piano where they're putting screws in it and chains on it and trying different things and catching it on fire just to see what would happen and all this kind of stuff. And so the general public was like, man, you guys, you're dropping too much acid. I don't know what's going on. I don't want something that sounds good and, that sort of thing. So they kind of pulled back more to this symphonic sound. And, a lot of directors were afraid that if you got too weird, it just wouldn't work, So, and plus Williams was kind of pushing the symphonic sound too. Why? Maybe because of Tedesco. He's planted that seed. Now, all of us, whether we want to admit it or not, by the time you guys graduate, you'll have little bits and pieces of each teacher. And obviously, if you had that teacher over long periods of time, more of it becomes ingrained in you, So especially if you study with someone privately, like he did with Tedesco for such a long period of time, that's just, it almost becomes a part of him the way he does it. Most of the time it's subconscious. Sometimes we can recognize that. So he starts this symphonic sound. So we get into Star Wars, and then once we get into it, so we kind of had this theme start to be set up. So anytime you hear that half step, you're thinking a big shark, right? And they're about to eat you and your ship. Okay. So once you get into Star Wars, it's not just a big shark or one big ship. What is it? A story, right? Now, is it just one person's story? No, really, right? There are a lot of different characters in it. So you're not just developing the storyline for one individual or one scene or one section. You have multiple storylines going on, and you have this layering effect happening. So how do you keep all that straight? You know, do you use the same music for this person that you use for this person? Yeah, one theme per person. It becomes very thematic. Now, what really happens, and, you know, when this comes out, you know, it just blows people's minds, right? And, you know, when Lucas first showed this, you know, a lot of his friends went, yeah, this is just awful. No one's going to like this, except for Steven Spielberg. He's like, yeah, this is, you're going to make so much money. And that's one of the reasons when a lot of folks are saying this is going to tank, that when Lucas was, you know, negotiating the rights, he said, well, let me have all the rights to the toys. Yes, ma'am.
So did Star Wars originate the idea of having a theme per person, or was that like?
That is a beautiful question. Okay.
I thought that was a dumb question.
No, that is brilliant. So as much as Lucas gets credit for these wonderful, you know, having each character have a theme, he's completely ripped it off. Okay. That's exactly right. Absolutely. It was all part of opera before that. And probably, arguably, the person that brought it to the forefront the most and the best would be Wagner. And if you're looking at, say, the Ring Cycle, which is very, very, it took him about 27 years to write this piece. He was an egomaniac. He was in control of everything. So he didn't just write the music. He wrote the libretto, which is the words. He designed the sets. He did everything probably, I don't know, he might have even sewed the dresses. I don't know, because that's just the way he was, right? And so in his opera, every person has a theme, which is really, then it was like, man, this is awesome. Because if you have characters on stage, for example, if Dr. Watson and I are on stage and we're having this heated argument, okay, you can be brass. Dun, 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 dun. Yes, he likes the brass. So, all right. So Dr. Watson's brass, I'll be strings, okay? So he's coming, you know, he's being really, you know, he's upset and he's yelling at me, da, da, da. And as he's yelling, that brass, bum, 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 his theme is playing, right? And then when I come in with mine, here comes the full string section. As we're arguing back and forth. Now, as far as just the audience members, the first time you're watching it, you're going, man, this is exciting. Well, look at this. It went back and forth. But you don't really think about the music being tied to it. Now, if we happen to be arguing about another character that's coming on stage, their theme may be playing in the background as well, because that person's part of this thing. Now, if we're not talking about anyone specific, they may play another character's theme, foreshadowing them coming on stage.
Yeah, that's one thing that I really love about our sound designer, Brandon, is because every time I'm in a show, he always picks like the best theme for my character.
Oh, right.
I love it. It's so pretty. It's great.
Stay friends with the sound design.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing, and it becomes almost iconic, you know. And things that we, you know, like Ride of the Valkyries, dun da dun dun da 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 bum bum bum. You know, that's been used for every.
Wait, that sounds an awful lot like dun 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 dun.
No, dun 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 dun. Yeah. All right. So basically, one thing you'll discover is that, you know, to be nice, we'll say that Williams borrows themes, right? But that's just kind of part of music history, honestly. Musical borrowing, that happened all the time. It wasn't until we started getting into copyright issues that people got all huffy and puffy about it. But so we have Wagner doing that and he's setting those themes, and that's obviously something that Williams knew about, was aware of. It's like, hey, that's pretty cool. I wonder if this would work out as being this kind of Western in space. as Lucas was kind of thinking about, right? Throw in some samurai warriors with some.
I think he
some
even
swords.
called it a space opera. I think the
Yes.
first screenplay was even space opera was even said on there. Space
Was that before Starkiller?
I think so. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that music being that center line, and then you throw in those thematic things, and then you start looking at the movies that come afterwards, right? And what's really cool is it works for a single movie, but you don't really get to get that sense of character development with these themes unless you have sequels. Then you could go back and look and go, oh man, that part, right? And it's kind of one of those things too, because when you see, especially with Empire Strikes Back, when you hear dun 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 dun, even today, okay, you hear that, you're not thinking Superman, right? Immediately it's Vader. It's not even the Empire, it's Vader himself. And it's been so ingrained that that's Vader. If there was something else playing when he came walk, it would just seem weird. If there was another theme playing now, if we just kind of did it for fun, you just all have to go take a shower because it'd just be creepy.
So what is it about the connection between, like, emotionally between, because you're right. I mean, it's from Jaws to Superman to Indiana Jones to Vader we associate those themes with a specific character, maybe even a specific moment. What is there some sort of like a strategy or a philosophy that composers have when they do they know that certain instruments are going to register like emotionally in certain ways and they're going to fit with characters, or is it just more complete like chance, happenstance kind of stuff?
I think they're actively, we always talk about like in music about the color of instruments, okay? And all that really means is like if you have a flute and a tuba playing together, it's going to produce a different color than a flute and a clarinet, okay? A darker sound, a brighter sound, that sort of thing. So even with the key relationships and the themes, composers are thinking, okay, well, if we have Vader coming in, right? I want to have this theme for Vader. I'm not going to use flutes. As deadly as they can be. Flutes just would not work. It wouldn't work.
Piccolo could work. It doesn't correctly.
That would have to be one bad Mamma Jamma
Yeah,
piccolo.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't
I don't know. Lots of drums, it's because you think about it. What's the scene? Usually when you see Vader, there's war, right? And historically, drums and horns were used during war. Why? It scared the crap out of people, right? Because if you have 50 people that are attacking 200 people, you don't want them to know that there are 50 people. You want to have torches lit. You want to have horns. You want to start beating those drums in the middle of the night. They're going, oh my goodness, we just surrendered. I don't know what's going on, but I just don't know my weapon. Yes, ma'am.
Is that in any way related to the planets? These Mars?
Oh, of Holtz?
Yeah. I can't remember when my planet was.
Yes. It's kind of along the same line because it's programmatic music. So it's based off of some sort of literature program. Obviously, the planets. Well, now you could, because any of the film scores would be programmatic. It's based off of either some sort of legend of the movie itself, or the character storyline, any of that. So yes, it would definitely be along those same lines. It's programmatic. So it kind of works. It's kind of like another pretty well-known film, the 2001 Space Odyssey. They use Also Sprach Zarathustra, which most folks don't even realize that is for Strauss, but they just think of it as 2001 theme, right? So it's like, because I'll ask you my music appreciation class. All right, how many of you heard Also Sprach Zarathustra? No one raised their hands, right? Well, one. Okay, and then I'll play it, and they're like, oh yeah, I know that one.
It's kind of reminds of the content of it, I feel like, because the movie seems very nihilistic to me, and the title was Nietzsche.
Right.
But
Yeah, absolutely. And the same's true if you're deciding what character has what, right? And then especially if they kind of know where the story's going, is this person going to start off dark and get brighter, right? Are they going to start evil and turn bright at the end? Is it going to change? Are there going to be dark tendencies through it, right? And we see that with the prequels, especially, I know this is about Harry Potter, but the prequels, especially for like with Star Wars, where you see Anakin start going bad and he starts turning, and then you start hearing dun dun dun, that little theme of the Imperial March, ever so being planted, which is kind of cool, especially when you go back and look at any of those. Yes, ma'am.
So I forgot the word for music that can be heard by the characters and then music that can't be, but I know it's a music theory term that I should.
The diegetic,
Diegetic.
non,
Yes.
non-diegetic, yes.
Should remember that. In the context of musical scores, I was thinking specifically about the fourth Harry Potter movie, where we kind of experience our first music that can be heard by the characters, when the chorus is singing with the toads and everything. I wanted to know why you think that choice was made for the first part of the series to actually show music being sung as opposed to just background music.
Well, I think, it kind of starts looking at the development of character, I think. And if it's a school, right, then maybe that's part of their well-rounded curriculum in a way. That we're not just all magic and we're not all just always Voldemort's not always after us and we're not always freaking out.
There's a Hogwarts drama troupe. I think I would enjoy
Right.
it.
Well, I think too that fourth one, we were talking about this morning when we actually switched from John Williams to Patrick Doyle because we switched composers, I think twice in the series. Yeah. And I think what he did Azkaban, but it was Goblet of Fire, I think, where he switched over, and It was Patrick Doyle that composed. So it could have just been that the composer came in and wanted to do a different, explore the different sort of soundscapes that you could do to create a different feel, because I think we've all admitted that Azkaban, at least in terms of the films, took a very different turn, right? I mean, that's where the films really started to become, in many ways, more autonomous films as opposed to complete allegiance to the book. So it could have been that as well, just an experience of trying to see what kind of different emotions we can pull out. Yeah.
If I remember correctly, actually that scene was pulling from the books. Because if I'm remembering correctly, there was a Hogwarts choir, and Flitwick was instructing them if I'm remembering correctly.
Before that, in the books, is there any mention of music or choirs or anything like that, or was that the first book that it was mentioned in?
I'm pretty sure that scene happens in,
Yeah, it may not have been in
Fourth
that
one.
book, but there was previous mention of it.
I think the first book mentioned it just in passing.
Interesting.
Flitwick had been around.
Yeah,
So,
I think Flipper uses it as an excuse to not have to talk to people in Baltimore, or an emergency choir.
Yeah.
I've had a few of those.
An emergency choir practice.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that sounds very good.
And
Official.
in the first book, there's the whole school song that they sing,
Yeah.
which they totally admit until they're and it's only them singing it when they're in the chorus.
In the chorus.
I have a personal question for you.
Okay.
Which is your favorite character name in the Harry Potter series?
Ooh.
I think Victoria likes Hedwig and Umbridge.
Not because those
That's-
are my clarinet solos in high school. Right?
That's tricky. I have a tendency to pull a little more to the darker side, so probably Voldemort. I do like Hogwarts theme. And one thing to keep in mind too, and we were talking about just, John Williams getting a lot of obviously credit for this. He did come up with the themes, but probably as important, if not even more important as the themes, would be the orchestration of those and how it is decided what instrument plays what. That's huge because throughout history, there have been tons of arrangements of different things. And none of them are really, some are accepted, some are not. If we look at like Mussorgsky's picture at an exhibition, there's lots of arrangement of that. But orchestras only play revels. Why? That's the one that's kind of rose to the top. Now, if we look at it, now Williams gets credit as the composer. He came up with the theme, right? But he didn't do any of the orchestrations. It depends on, it kind of changes with Williams,
This
Conrad.
part was really fascinating to me too. You know, that sort of breakdown of, because yeah, the composer is the one that's like, oh, you may take my stuff, let me have my
Yes.
paycheck. You know, and then there's these other people who vary really almost per movie, who've done arrangements and even conducting, which also is a factor, right? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. So like with Williams, he always uses for the Harry Potter series. He used Conrad Pope and Eddie Carmel for the orchestrations. And then as far as conducting the Chamber of Secrets, William Ross conducted it. The other two, Williams did. Now that's a huge thing too, because if you're conducting it, you're the one we were just talking about this before in the office, where you're the one that decides, you know, pushing the tempos a little bit, dynamics a little bit, because all of it's kind of relative, right? So if we look at, well, what's a piano? What's soft? What does that mean? Well, that's relative to what's loud. And as an audience member, you don't really know that. Well, we can come up with a basic concept. Maybe this is soft. Maybe this is pianissimo. Really, 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 really soft. Okay, well, if that's really, really, really soft, then what's forte? Or if this is piano, oh my goodness, right? It has to be relative within it. So just having a conductor, you know, what piano is, how we're going to interpret this, how we're going to breathe, how we're going to let this happen. You know, am I going to hold this a little bit longer? Am I going to go here a little bit longer? I'm going to put more emphasis here. I'm going to pull a little bit back here. What's going to happen? And that can change quite a bit between the conductors as well. So, you know, and that kind of takes a little bit of a different twist when you look at it. So, oh, John Williams, what about his orchestrator? Because had it been different, who knows? You know, different orchestrator, different sound. Who knows? Instead of doing brass here, you did strings here. Instead of doing this, instead of doing this. And a lot of it too is working with the director as well. You know, what do you think we need here? Oh man, I was imagining.
Yeah, we were talking this morning a little bit about, at least just from the experience that I have working with composers, you know, it's varied. I mean, I've had some who come in and they've read the script and they have all kinds of thematic ideas about, you know, who needs a theme and where this needs to come in and how this is going to connect this to that. And then at other times, the composer might be more like, how much do you need? When, where? You know, approaching it more of like a job, you know, like, you know, let me just spit out something for what you need. And that's where I was really interested in sort of the emotional connectives, because you have some musicians who, I guess the really good ones, I'm not one, so I couldn't say for sure, but the good musicians are the ones that sort of come in and they go, okay, what kind of mood do you want? Oh, okay, you want this, you know, ding, 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 and they can just play that, you know, and then they go, oh, do you want that? You want something darker? Okay, what about this? Dun, 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 you know, and they're just sort of improvisationally coming up with emotive connectives to what the mood or the scene is. Most of the time you will have locked a picture, meaning it's cut together before a composer comes in and the cut of the film is playing in the background while an orchestra plays and the conductor can see it. Sometimes the musicians can as well. But a lot of that stuff gets decided before, at the very, very end, right? I mean, they'll go in and they'll say, hey, Bill, this scene 20 is just not working. Can you put some carpet in it? Which is a nice way of saying, can you make it work with putting an incidental or a theme or something in there that maybe transitions us from one scene to the other and keeps it, you know, sustained. Or maybe it's legitimately, this scene emotionally is not connecting, the female character needs a theme. And where can we plug that in other places to make it work emotionally to tell the story, you know, because we need to be reminded of that character later on or so on and so forth. And then that becomes the major thread, you know, of a story. So sometimes it's very organic, sometimes it's, you know, extremely planned out. I think that just depends on the actual musician or composer that you hire to do, you know, to do the music. I was talking about Bill Conti earlier. Bill Conti, I met him at LSU a few years ago, and is pretty fairly famous composer. And the Rocky theme is probably like his most noted thing. But he hurt my feelings because I was talking to him about all of the music that he'd done for movies and TV, and how, it's so good, and he was, that stuff was crap, that's not real music. I've written symphonies, that's my music, this stuff I wrote for like these movies, it's dun 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 dun, yeah, whatever, it's a paycheck, and he was telling all of the people who were interested in the music department in composing and being professional musicians that you need to treat those jobs as for hire, because you have to be diligent. They'll call you at the last minute. They want, X amount of music in sometimes the course of a day. They'll send you the footage. You got to look at it. You got to compose it, send it back. And it's just, he's like, it's just a paycheck to me. He's like, I don't even think about really the stuff that I've written for those, for those mediums. I'm more invested in the music that I've created, to be performed live, or, that he's composed. It's more symphonic, I guess more original to him. And he saw the film scoring and television scoring process as being just merely a professional kind of thing that you just do because you have to, because you make money, and then you move on. But he wasn't emotionally invested really in the stuff that he had done, which was just, it's like crushed me, right? Because I'm just like, oh my God, the theme for North and South is amazing. And he's like, yeah, I wrote that in like 2 hours one day because, they needed it, and they were over this opening credits sequence. And all of a sudden it became so iconic of a theme that they just reincorporated it throughout this 6-hour miniseries. Like in various places, they would just do different iterations of the same theme from the beginning. And it would just be with like maybe 1 or 2 different instruments, and maybe a few different measures or whatever. But it was the same thing, over and over again, which kind of, I guess, is a different take on the way film music, registers with us. I tend to still land on the side of the music, sound in general, but music in particular is so important, I think, in connecting us to the story. Because when you're reading the book, you don't hear music played for you. I mean, you might play your own music, right? You might be listening to something, right? But it's not like something has been scored or composed for that particular moment for you. Someone has done that for you when you go into a movie. So I get interested in how we respond emotionally to those moments, like when a theme has connected, and then maybe when we disidentify with it and we go, that just doesn't fit, or it doesn't work. Why does that not work? Or why does it work? Why do we get so attached to a certain theme? Is it about the character? Is it about the music? Is it just about the timing? Is it about how it gets reappropriated? It's probably all of those things, but it's good to unpack it, I think. Yeah, go ahead, Patty.
On the emotional, connect or disconnect from, scenes and stuff, I remember in my film studies class in high school, we were watching one of the movies, and I think it was Shutter Island, and I wasn't a big fan of it at all. And I remember watching it, and we were talking on the sound, on the subject of the sound. I remember thinking, this is trying to make me feel something I'm not feeling. It's trying to make me feel like I'm supposed to be feeling scared about it and just curious about that, and I'm just like, no.
It felt very contrived. It felt very forced.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. The sound was trying to make me feel something I just wasn't feeling, because it was at the very beginning. And it was like, I haven't had any build up yet. And
this is dark, ominous, sort of foreboding thing.
Yeah, it wasn't there, and I'm just like, why are you trying to make me feel this when it's not there yet? Maybe later, if this music had been played later, maybe I would have been feeling it.
Yeah.
At this point, no.
But not that early on. Well, John Carpenter has got a great story about the original Halloween movie. Carpenter's done the music for all his movies. And he'll tell you, he's the first one to tell you he's a hack, that he's the cheapest musician that he can find, which is why he does all this, so he doesn't think his music is fantastic or anything, but the Halloween theme, that simple 5/4 piano tune, just because it's in 5/4, I think is probably what makes it so unique, but because we hadn't really heard anything, I don't know, it's probably ripped off from somebody else, but probably, right? Yeah. His dad was a music professor at Bowling Green, so I'm sure that's how it went down, but he said, they screened the movie, and he said it just didn't work. It just wasn't scary. It just didn't scare people. And so after he went back in and said, okay, let me just write these little variations of these themes in this one tune. And then the next time they screened it, it was like this transformation had occurred. Like the music had just added everything that was missing. So it's interesting that sometimes adding it in to force that works, and then other times I guess it's been added in and it doesn't work for people because it's, you know, you're trying to shove it down too fast, or the images don't match. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
2 years ago at KCACTF, I was able to watch the sound design, like all the sound designers present their designs that have been nominated for the exhibit. And there were two guys that were partners, and then ones that won, they were brilliant, so they deserved it. But one was a composer and one was like the designer, and they worked together, you know, to make their designs. And they said that their first step in their process was to go, and this was for theater, so they would go and they would sit in a rehearsal and listen. They would close their eyes the whole time and listen to the play in its entirety. And it kind of goes with emotion, because they were talking about how they would feel what was supposed to be happening, you know, like without watching it, like what did it need to sound like, you know, to create the, like, kind of enhance the emotion that the dialogue was presenting, you know. And so that's where they started. And, you know, they would go and they would sit there, and as they were listening to it, they wouldn't play for everyone, but they would, you know, either play certain pieces, or the composer would actually, you know, like play the piano or whatever. And it was really incredible, because when they were presenting their design, you know, they were talking about those different emotions, and they like showed a little piece of the script that they, you know, like for that piece of music. And really, you know, you just read it and you listen to it, and it flows so, you know, so well with the words. And I just thought it was interesting that they, you know, went off of like strictly emotion. You know, they didn't care about what was happening. It, you know, it's all about the feeling.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, probably we mentioned this earlier, but I think that probably reminds many people of like what it was like to be a musician, a pianist in the silent film era, because oftentimes, you know, the musicians hadn't even seen the movie that would come in and screen. So they're just sitting there improvisationally, emotionally trying to connect with whatever was going on in the story. So, you know, if it was, you know, Keystone Cop comedy where people are bumping into each other, you know, you have to do this, you know, I mean, yeah, I mean, but it's, you know, you're seeing it, you're not closing your eyes, you know, because you're not hearing the dialogue, but you're still trying to match an emotion with an action through, you know, through your playing. Because I can imagine, you know, a movie could be ruined for you if you had the back in the silent era, if you had a bad accompanist, right? You could just blame
Absolutely.
the pianist. You know, it's like, well, that movie sucked because the pianist was terrible.
It happened
like,
all the time.
It didn't match well at all. You know, you stink, right? I want my money back. And so it was probably a very, you know, I don't know enough about that era of music history to know, but I'm sure that was probably a thing where you know, if you were a really lauded, like good accompanist to, you know, a movie like that, you could probably find a pretty steady gig.
And it actually got to the point to where if there were some theaters that had rotating pianists or organists, some folks would come, like when they knew a particular one was playing, like pianist or organist, to accompany that film, because it was just like, yeah, that other guy has no idea what's going on. And a lot of times they would just send, I forgot what they call it now, a print or something, where they would just say, play march when you see a train.
Yeah.
Play this when you see them riding horses. Play this, play, you know, they weren't very specific at first. And then it was like, you know, people were just playing all sorts of stuff. And it's like, oh, that was awful. And then they would see it again. They're like, oh, that was wonderful.
Yeah.
What? That makes no sense. And then they started getting more specific. Play the Blue Danube Waltz. Play very specific type of things. And I was telling Dr. Watson earlier that there was actually an incident where the Philadelphia Philharmonic was on tour, and they had some time off, and so they got this gig to go in and play for this film. So they just came in, the film started, and they just played their concert music. And once they finished, yeah, it had nothing to do with this train robbery, you know. And once they finished, they just packed up and left. The movie was still playing. So like, all right, that's it.
That's it.
All right, we're off.
Peace out.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
I'd be pretty upset if you paid like $40 for a ticket to that, you know. You got screwed on the music.
But it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that because, talking about that, the enhancement, because that was kind of a 19th century movement, to have the music there to not necessarily to enhance the words, but almost as a duet together. And that kind of pushed that romanticism idea forward, which would have been the time Wagner would have been around, and that whole leitmotif and giving each person different themes, and that sort of thing. But then also, it kind of made me think of, there's a really famous concert pianist by the name of Anton Rubinstein that said, I don't play the notes any better than anyone else, but the rest, the rest, and sometimes if you have all this great music going on and all of a sudden there's a scene where there's no music, it's very dramatic. And I always kind of think of the Road to Perdition, if you guys have seen that, where there's a scene right before, and it's just rain. And the rain itself kind of makes its own music. And something bad's going to happen. And they just stretch it out, but not too far. So not until you get bored, but you're like, wait, I need something. And just the downfall of the rain, and we see that in other things too. Remember, there's a scene in one of the prequels of Star Wars in the asteroid field where there's no music cut. And then there was a little bit where they were going, wait, what do you mean there's no music in the asteroid field? The asteroid field had music. Let's just not do it. And then you get to hear the explosion when Obi-Wan's been chased, and it just kind of cuts out, which makes it, all of a sudden, the lack of music changes that significantly. Now, if you had, if it was flip-flopped, it probably wouldn't work very well. But because it's so dramatic of taking that away, then it kind of shocks us back into it, because it's easy to kind of forget about those themes if we're not careful, and we just kind of lull, start taking what I like to call a sound bath, where you just sit there and just let the music just flow on by. You're not even really paying attention to what's going on, like a bubble bath. And then all of a sudden it's off, whoa, what happened? Right.
It's like movies with like big scenes of panic, and you can't hear any sound at all. Like not even the people. Like it's like big scenes of panic or whatever, and it's so silent that it almost like crushes you, and you can't breathe with them. Like the best one I can think of right now is like Hunger Games. I think it happens one time in that, but like just when something big explodes and then there's this big silence or like ringing of ears, like you can go straight into that feeling that person feels. It's crazy.
It happened in Big Hero 6 too, because I watched that last night. So.
Well, and certainly I think those moments are very purposeful. I mean, they're done for that purpose, to create a certain mood or tone. I'm trying to think of the last time that I saw a movie where the music annoyed me, because sometimes the music can, as critical as it is, I think it can overbear sometimes on a scene and weigh so heavily that you have kind of a patty reaction of, oh, come on, you're just beating me over the head with, what you're trying to. You got something, Kevin? What
example of that would be one of those peaceful, happy-go-lucky, soft sound music during a slaughterfest?
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that, but have you seen a movie like where they done that, where it's like a?
Okay, a basic example was I remember, what was it, the ant bully, when the guy was killing all the bugs.
Oh yeah.
At war, he was listening to, I think Beethoven or something. It was like, I don't even remember what. Oh no, it was the Nutcracker. And all you see in the image is just everyone dying. And like.
Interesting.
I think that's been done in television, like with like crime shows and stuff. When you have like a psychotic person, they've done, and it kind of just, you get that feeling of creepy.
I think it's, I think it's like
It's opposing things, so opposing that
Yeah.
it just gives you,
it's
it's so uncomfortable that it makes you uncomfortable.
I'm laughing because if you've seen Forgetting Sarah Marshall, Jason Segel's character is a composer, and he does incidental work for TV shows, and and he's like, come on, man, just give me the dark and brooding, all right? It's what we always do, right? He's just in there, dun, 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 I'm going to die, right? I mean, it's just, and I just made me think of that, because they manufacture that, and so it becomes, I think they become codes in a way, they just cue us for certain things. And sometimes we're so used to the codes that it's like, oh, come on, really? You know, for real? You know, and so then you have a movie that might play with those codes, like, you know, something like, probably nobody has seen this, so I'll be talking way out of my league here, but like American Psycho with Christian Bale, you know, every time he's killing someone, it's just these graphic, bloody things to Huey Lewis in the News. It's a Huey Lewis soundtrack. You know, now that juxtaposition is just crazy weird, right? I mean, you don't have the dun 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 dun, you know, you don't have that. It's, you know, it's we're climbing Jacob's ladder. You know, it's just this crazy Huey Lewis song, you know, and you're just like, wow, that is very twisted, right? But playing with those codes and understanding the right moment that you're trying to create emotionally for an audience. So sometimes it can juxtapose, and other times it's, you know, it's the familiar codes that, you know, that we would see.
But then in that case, it becomes their own theme, like that upbeat music during their moment of insanity, I
I just
guess.
thought of an example.
It's like, can you hear Huey Lewis after seeing American
Guardians of
Psycho?
the
Yeah,
Galaxy
that's what I was thinking.
at the very beginning when he's walking in with his, you know, it's supposed to be funny, but it's just really cool how they incorporate that as music he's listening to, but it's also music we're listening to, and he's like fighting these things or
Yeah.
whatever, you know.
Is the mixtape?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things was
Yeah.
always like if they take like a well-known, like a nursery rhyme, and then they twist it, you know, turn it
Yeah.
minor. So it's something that you're all familiar with, and it's naturally has this connection to something sweet and innocent. Then all of a sudden it's, you know, Mary had a little, and you're like, oh man, this is just freaky. That alone is freaking you out before anything ever happens, because it's being twisted. Yeah.
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. Yeah,
Yeah.
that nursery rhyme.
And then there's others that become almost, you know, just almost farce of themselves. Yeah, like there's a Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet theme where it's used every time that there's a slow running person on the beach to someone else, you know, and that becomes, you just start seeing it in comedies, and it becomes, oh, here they're going to do this. Oh, they're doing that thing. Then it becomes like a comedic thing because it's been used so much and overdone so much that they just kind of put that in there for that.
Like
you
the
know.
Chariots of Fire theme.
Yeah, yeah.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
With the way those things get recycled is you know, sometimes quite hilarious.
The Will,
How they get integrated. What?
the Will.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's fair. Yeah. Victoria, you were asking about, you had said in one of your questions, like, how would the movie have been different or the movies have been different if somebody like Danny Elfman had scored the film? And I think the obvious answer is it would have a different tone. I mean, I think, I think emotionally he'd probably be able to match. I mean, Elfman's good. I mean, he does good work. I would be interested to see. I mean, I think it would probably be darker, for sure. I mean, Williams kind of, his themes.
Definitely would have fit the later movies better than earlier.
I think that's probably very fair. Yeah. Williams tends to have kind of a, you don't think of Williams as being dark. I mean, although he has
I
done
think it was
that.
kind of like the epic fantasy story.
Yeah, that's probably fair.
A good example of like music scene, a character, as far as this one is like, I know when I first watched the first Friday the 7th movie, like I got really hopeful because Hedwig didn't die initially. Like I was so hopeful, and then they start playing the Hedwig theme, and she comes in, and I'm just like, I remember screaming out.
You knew it was coming, right?
Yeah, you knew
It was
it
a
was
theme.
coming, and like I just screamed out because I was so upset. I was like, they gave me hope. And I was so mad.
Was the music really the cue that like, it's like, oh my God, they're playing the theme?
But when I was watching it again recently, I was like, I noticed it that time, but like maybe not when I first watched it because I was just so caught up in it. But yeah.
But the little things start popping out here and there. I said here and there, the little things start popping out. Well, sorry, go ahead,
Might
Ben.
be a difference in like the way movies and TV shows are
Well, I know for TV, the content is a lot less. I mean, obviously, because you're usually working in 30 minutes to, sometimes 45. And so what you generally do is you sit down and you talk with a composer or a music department about what percentage of the actual finished product needs music. So you may only need, you've got maybe in TV, you've got your theme song, which is obviously, an iconic part of the experience. But then you have those incidentals that just kind of pop up, what was it? It could be something as simple as Seinfeld's, just the, it was just those like low notes, right, between each scene. It's just those incidental transitions, between moments, but boom, boom, yeah, that would love to gotten paid for that.
Yeah.
And it's really all, I mean, I'm not a musician, but it sounds to me like those are really just riffs or restructurings of the original theme that they wrote,
They're just hooks.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reason we remember them, right? Because all music is a very psychological setup anyway. They want to give you that first theme. Then after the first theme, they can do whatever they want to, but they're going to bring that first theme back, right? Because that's what you remember. And it's kind of like the trick. You guys know the trick about how to remember someone if you meet them for the first time? You don't? Oh, okay. How many of you have met someone that after they walked away, you went, I have no idea what their name is? Okay. But it's kind of like the trick if you go, Dr. Watson.
Yes.
Dr. Watson, nice to meet you, sir, Dr. Watson.
Awesome.
Blah, 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 Dr. Watson, Dr. And then when he leaves, it was nice meeting you, Dr. Watson. Right?
Or you could just not care what their name is.
Well, if I didn't, I wouldn't be talking to him. I was like, he'd be like, Dr. Whatever. I know.
Not you, Joe.
It's it's that repetitive thing.
It's that repetitive thing because we want to get that hook in. So it's the first thing you hear, the last thing you hear, right? And so if you say it periodically, throughout the conversation.
Why are you saying my name
Yeah.
5 times? Is this Vladimir likes no ketchup on his French fries?
Right.
Oh, just- yeah.
You're running the entire conversation. I want to talk about video games story. Because I was playing Borderlands last night, I noticed they incorporate noises that you associate with violence.
Right.
Into like the normal thing, so you think something's creeping up on you, you're like, oh god, no, it's not gunfire, it's just a music thing, and it was annoying.
It's like totally his bag, by the way. So
That happens quite often. And, if you're familiar with like Resident Evil, like the earlier games, that would happen. And a lot of times you'd be walking, all of a sudden the music would cue and you're like, you're supposed to be a zombie, supposed to be a zombie, supposed to be a zombie. And there's nothing there.
Free music was one of my favorites. When I was little, I used to play it, I was like, the best thing about it.
Yeah. Actually last spring I did a video game music class. Yeah. That was me. Yeah, that's right. You were in my class. Yeah. I remember because we did that Skype thing. Or that wasn't Skype, it was yeah, there we go. I remember that. Yeah.
Everyone kept asking me for help with World of Warcraft.
Oh, really? Because of that?
Like all my friends didn't know how it works. They're like, Victoria, how do I do this, and this? But I always have to come over.
Yeah. It was quite fun, especially those that had never played or done that sort of thing. So we'd be on the tram and they'd fall off. All right, I'm gonna go get them. I'll be back.
yeah, I don't know how that class worked, but I know several students took it and liked it because really liked it because they were actually in gameplay a lot.
Right.
Doing certain things. I mean, did you set it up to where they were doing tasks all together?
Well, we set up it had 3 levels where you didn't get, grades, you got experience points, for each level.
Mhm.
And then the last, the first one's typical, read the book, do some posts, take the exam. The second one, we had these reviews that they had to write music on 4 different video games and had how it related to the lore of the game. Does it work? Does it not work? That sort of thing. And then the third levels, we actually met in game in World of Warcraft and traveled around and talked about the music in real time while being attacked or people falling off trams or whatever. It was quirky. It had its moments, but for the most part, I think it worked pretty well.
Did you require them to only listen to the game music that was done like for the game, or could they play their own music like in the background while they were playing and silence the music?
Well, they could, but they had to write on the 4 cities, the music of the 4 cities, of the major cities. We did Alliance this time. We'll do Horde next time. So they could do it anytime they wanted to, But once they finished those 4 papers, then they could go to, if they got over 100,000 XP, or over an A, then they could do dungeons and stuff together to get bonus XP, working together with it. So then they could travel around and, but they could listen to whatever they wanted to after they finish their papers.
Interesting.
I enjoyed the music of World of Warcraft.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I picked it.
I still have the account, so I still play it whenever it gets airtime. So I haven't had the chance to live stream it again.
You had some pretty famous composers too that are like starting to, like, I know Carpenter just did some work for Borderlands too, not too long ago in terms of scoring, like the music for that. So, I mean, it's,
And like God of War, the score
lucrative
for
thing.
God of War is huge.
I haven't heard it.
Yeah.
It's awesome. It's pretty cool. Yeah, go ahead.
This is changing subjects again, but it has to do with Harry Potter. So after, I'm assuming it's after the movies were done, there was a music movement, Oliver Boyd and the Remember-Alls, that like they have albums of music that is about Harry Potter. It's like the story, like they, yeah,
There are several, there are some.
Who was this?
Oliver Boyd and the Remember-Alls.
They're my favorite.
Yeah, they're my favorite.
Before the books, before the movies.
It's like a mixtape essentially.
Harry and Potter.
It's like a fandom mixtape.
Yeah, but it was just, I think it's really cool that something like Harry Potter inspired. you
Yeah.
know, yeah.
Like more
inspired-
music.
There are several forms of fan music out. There's fan music for Harry Potter, fan music for Doctor Who. There's fan music for Star Wars. I mean, it's just,
Now, when you say fan music, you mean original compositions that have been done in the spirit of a
Yeah, like.
news story or a,
based on,
Or-
based on the series.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
So like with the Harry Potter music that was inspired by the books and the movies, like there's songs about different events and there's songs about all of it together and different characters and different relationships. And
I
That's
know
pretty
one
cool.
of the Harry and the Potter songs is Save Ginny Weasley, which is talking about saving her from the basilisk. And that's all it's about.
There's a Snape versus Snape by one of them, like his internal struggle with stuff.
there's like
That's cool.
one for Lupin and
There's a song though, there's other songs that have to do with like, like I'm going home, like how it feels to be going someplace that feels like home.
Oh,
So it's not just about a character, it's not just about, like he adds in little tidbits that would make you feel,
yeah, there's one that like talks about the Hogwarts Express and the twins and, just like the way that he feels about Hogwarts and the people there and everything that's there. And there's one for the fans too, and it's, that one's more of like he just more or less talks through it. There's like a chorus where they sing, but he talks about, like the family that the fans have created because of Harry Potter, and it's really cool.
And never mind the whole, fan musical bit.
Harry Potter.
yeah, I read a little bit about that
It's really good.
last week.
It's really fun.
But I didn't know if we were going to venture into like musical theater stuff, but
And not to
Why
mention she's
not,
right.
Joey?
well, I didn't know if we'd have
It's
time,
really
but
good.
yeah, I haven't listened to any of it. I just read a few articles on its creation. So, I mean, I'm not surprised. I mean, it seems that at some point, every really popular fan culture of a show, a book, something, some kind of cultural artifact seems to produce a musical at some point from it. And
Well, I
the
think
degrees of quality, of course, obviously vary,
I
but
think it's
Spider-Man.
impressive
yeah, exactly.
It kind of propelled at least the star of it. Like he's a well-known actor now.
The star of the musical? Oh,
Because he was on
And it was
Glee.
put on by
He's
by
on what?
university.
Glee.
It's Darren Chris.
okay.
Yeah, it was
But
put
it was
on
put on
by,
by Michigan University, university got together and wrote it, and did it. It became so popular that we're like, you have to do a new one. And they did another one,
and then they did another one, and Ivana Lynch actually read in that one.
really.
For the Harry Potter senior year.
And I'm not sure if the play that JK's writing or producing right now has score in it, but that's interesting too, that she's, you know.
Well, I mean, there's gonna be a sound designer for it.
Using the music, whether it's a musical or straight.
Interesting. Silence. Is there anywhere else that we should go? Discuss? Talk?
Into one of the video games. That's
Video games are so.
The only Harry Potter video game that I know of is the Lego game.
No, they had one that wasn't a Lego game, but it was so bad.
I know.
They have ones that you can play on like DS and stuff, because I have them as a kid.
DS was your shit. That was like your, it was your thing. Back in the day.
I used to have this really old Harry Potter computer game. It was one of the ones that was on this for PC. It was for the Chamber of Secrets movie. Yeah, I think there was like a short series of the PC games of this type, and with every new game came new spells, and the old spells from the previous game got carried over. I think, can't remember exactly what the game was called, but
Did the
at a
mu-
certain point, I just rage quit because I couldn't.
Did-
Because the same system on there was horrible.
Was the music from the movies or was it?
It was fun.
Yeah.
For the most part, there were a few added in song music for certain situations, but for the most part, it was the same.
What's the would you all say that the classic Harry Potter theme is the one that you recognize the most? Just that soft.
Play the music.
Dun, 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 dun.
So everyone plays nonstop Harry Potter. Nonstop. But if that's cool too, because.
Which is really just the theme to Witches of Eastwick.
Like when they.
As we were talking about Discovery.
When they added in the Hogwarts Express where you could ride it from park to park. And then like that music for the, when you walk through, platform 9 3/4 and you can see the Hogwarts Express for the first time, and it's the music that's playing when Harry sees it for the first time. Like it's cool because it like recreates that.
Well, it's recreating the movie experience for you.
I
Yeah,
think,
it's interesting.
like, anytime a fan hears that music, it's automatic. Because
It's Indiana Jones. It's Jaws. It's just
Well, that-
become.
Every
that-
classic movie pretty much has its own staple music.
yeah, and that's for Harry Potter, it's that one. Like there are variations on it.
Oh yeah.
So, but any like those specific,
That's
that's
play
specific.
it with something that's I see Harry Potter playing in this movie. Like,
My teacher connected Harry Potter soundtrack in class, and she was like, "Oh, look, you got," like she would play classical music.
Yeah.
So like when I got to college, who was in Harry Potter Pandora? So like I made like a Pandora station. I was like, "Can you do this?"
Is it- yeah. It's-
So I need to go watch it.
Yeah.
So I just stopped listening.
The
Final
music
Fantasy
creates an
soundtracks
addiction.
Also work very well for focusing. I found
The what?
the Final Fantasy soundtracks.
Yeah, I think 2007, San Francisco or San Diego Orchestra did just the music of Final Fantasy.
Yeah, I actually went to their concert. They had a concert at the in Atlanta, at whatever place I can't remember at the time, and they had the orchestra and singers doing all of the Final Fantasy
The-
orchestration.
The Nashville 4th of July fireworks are set to Star Wars music. Which is
Well, of course. Yeah.
It's
Right.
interesting, like, the first time I went, like, this year they're set to it, like, the Nashville Orchestra planned it, and, like, they open it, and it's just like, the Nashville fireworks are huge and crazy.
Hmm.
So it's really interesting, and like, the fireworks are synced to the, music as well.
And we'll probably see more of that because talking about the Final Fantasy, I know when it first, the opening, it sold out in like 3 hours. Orchestra, the seats did. So we may be seeing more of a shift to, not only having Beethoven and Bach, but having film scores and video game scores and,
Well,
You know.
there's something interesting, like, I know for Doctor Who, it's there's a fan orchestra that happened, and it's like bands from all over the world individually playing their own instruments, and then a compilation of all the videos into one big piece. And it was arranged by somebody, and they all, it's several of the songs from the series. And they've done a bunch of videos, and it's just a whole bunch of, probably 100 people doing it at least.
Sounds like that Eric Whitaker stuff that he used to do for TED, that choral stuff that went through YouTube, where he would do all that synchronization. Well, that's interesting. Why is it, Mark, that so many musicians, I shouldn't even say musicians, it's not fair. Why is it that it seems that there is a tension between orchestras that want to play classical music versus more popular music? Why has that always been there?
I think it's just maybe a little bit of the stigma with popular music, because once that split kind of happened, and the stigma with art music too.
Yeah.
That art music is the frou-frou, and that sort of thing. And pop is it's pop, it's cookie cutter, it's the same sort of
My
thing.
orchestra, when I went to JSU, I was nominated to play with their orchestra, and they did John Williams, and they did all of his music. It was beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's becoming a little more accepted. I mean, it took a while because, we were talking about this before where
The orchestras need money now, so they're just going to play like.
you do what you do.
Yeah.
I mean, you play what you play.
Come on. Yeah.
And it's smart because you either adapt or you disappear. And so, I mean, that's what they can do is they can either do full concerts like that,
Yeah.
right? Which is bringing folks in, or they could mix and match, so they're still introducing some of that art music in with the other. And some of it, to be honest with you, is just as fantastic as, what we think of as typical art music. I mentioned the God of War soundtrack earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, that had the San Diego Opera with it. I mean, I'll send
That's
you a
cool.
link because you're listening to it and like, I feel like I should be battling something, and I've popped it on while grading papers. Man, this is going to be great. Very intense grading scene, going on.
Wow, Dr. Laughlin gave me a lot of feedback.
Right, yeah.
I don't love what's going on.
And it's all in red. He looks angry. He's bearing down. Yeah.
Do you think that that divide is going to be bridged even more with at least instrumentally, with the fact that there's now electric ability with violins and stuff?
I don't know. I don't know if that will ever necessarily go away because we have folks now that that was always the big thing with the CD, is that it was going to do away with LPs, and then you had the purists that were like, well, the CD sound is not really true. We need to hit a crack on pop. And now we're starting to see vinyl come back, which is kind of cool. So I don't think that the electronic part will ever completely overtake. I think there's room for both. You just got to have to be flexible, and it depends on the generation of folks that are coming up doing it. Because you got to think, my generation coming up. I mean, we were used to hearing electronic music, Atari 2600 or whatever, with video games coming up through it, and get to see that development. But the thing about doing that is you get to also see where it's like, oh, that's the same thing we did way back when. It's like when you go to the theater and people are like, oh, are you going to see the 3D version? No, I saw the 3D version in 1977. I did the same thing. That's not new.
Yeah.
There's nothing new necessarily there. I had a composer friend that used to say that nothing new had been composed since 1950, that everything else was just rehashing everything else and flipping it around. And, I don't know if I'm that jaded yet or not.
1950 is pretty generous, I would say.
I think, yeah.
A little older than that, maybe. But
That's about the time he started composing. So that would be about right, I guess, when he.
Well, it doesn't bother me when I hear music that sounds similar to other things. I think to me, it's just like, I know what a Danny Elfman score sounds like. I know what a John Williams score sounds like. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing when you match it with content that fits. I think the disconnect happens when it doesn't fit, right? It doesn't match a movie, or it's overbearing to the point where it disturbs or disrupts your experience of the story. Because I'm not at a concert. If I'm at a concert, I want to hear the music. If you want to do visual imagery, that's fine, but I want the focus to be on the players, right, and the music. But a movie, it's the reverse. I don't want the sound to overtake my visual experience. But that's just.
And it's kind of interesting because we're talking about, where you don't have the music, reading a book and stuff. Depending on, like, if I'm, reading, say, I don't know, a fanboy book, I'm reading the Thrawn trilogy or something, I insert music while I'm reading. Like, and it's not necessarily the things I've heard before, but I hear certain things matching that scene, so it almost kind of sneaks in without me even trying. So I'm like reading it. I'm like, because all this music is kind of going on. Yes, very excited. It's like, what book are you reading? I was like, you got to check out the film score. I mean, this is awesome. Like what? Because I have a tendency to insert it.
Do you anybody else do that? I'll be like walking across campus sometimes and I'll like hear themes in my head, and stuff. Right? Do you guys do that?
Well, my husband and I started doing that. He got into it. We and I read on Hobbit and listen. It wasn't Dead Meadow. It was something else really strange. It was amazing.
Yeah, there's some things with Pink Floyd and
I was
and the Wizard of Oz. There's all kinds of stuff
yeah.
you can do with like listening to music with movies.
Yeah, do it really late at night.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have some funny brownies.
Some of them are looking at us like,
Yeah.
what are you talking
Yeah.
about? Google it.
Google it off
Dark Side of
campus.
the Moon, Wizard of Oz. Just
Yes.
Google it.
Google it off campus.
Change your world.
Yeah.
What?
I would break all the dishes. I would just start throwing them into the music.
Be so into the music. Yeah. It's good stuff. But everybody's packing up, so it must be like time. Is it time?
It's like 12.
Oh, okay. Sorry, we went over. All right. Sorry. Fine. Peace. See you later. Bye. Thank you, Dr. Laughlin,
Thank
for
you,
coming
guys.
in today and for.
You can, but only the grade for the second time will count.
Dr. Hodgins.
Sure.